Hi, everybody. It's me, Dr. Nicole Montero, and I want to talk about a topic today that's really commonplace, but it's not often discussed, and that is fear of flying. So, I want to ask a couple of questions. Have you ever actually just backed out of a trip because you were too afraid to get on the plane? Or have you gone on a trip where you stepped on the plane with your palms so sweaty, your heart racing, your thoughts all over the place, filled with dread because you were afraid to fly on the plane? Or have you found yourself just anticipating a trip instead of with excitement, with fear, dread, and anxiety because you were worried about such a long flight where you would have to fly over the ocean or over land and you were really afraid of it? So these are all different ways of having or exhibiting fear of flying. And actually some anywhere between 10 and 40% of adults report at some point having this fear of flying. So it is really, really common. And as air travel becomes more and more commonplace, where more and more commercial flights are going all over the world from one location to the other. Actually, commercial air travel has become much more safe. It's actually safer than any other mode of transportation. So, for example, in 2015, more than 3.5 billion people flew on airplanes, and they actually made it safely. There were only a little more than 500 fatalities that year. Very unfortunate, but if you look at it, 3.5 billion people traveling and just over 500 fatalities. Now, if you compare that to road traffic, so driving, which is one of actually the least safe modes of transportation, in the year 2013, there were more than 1.25 million road traffic fatalities. So more than 1.25 million people died in car crashes, right? But what captures our imagination? It's whenever we hear, because of the nonstop media, that there was either a plane went down or there was a negative, an unfortunate air incident where people were shaken up by turbulence, or we hear about a terrorist attack. All of these capture our imagination. There just seems to be something pretty subversive about getting on a huge metal object that defies gravity and goes up in the air more than 35 or 30,000 feet in the air and goes over land and sea, right? There's something about that that just blows our minds. So whenever there is something that goes wrong or there's an accident or there are fatalities, it really captures our imagination. But I really wanted to kind of break down the numbers because overwhelmingly air travel is safe, and it is becoming safer by the day and by the year, right? So another thing about fear of flying is that it can come in so many different forms. I just asked a few questions because some people actually still get on a flight even though they're mortified, they're terrified. They might have to do anything from getting anti-anxiety pills from their doctor to drinking a lot of alcohol, or they're just mortified the entire flight. Right. And then on the other extreme, some people completely avoid flying. They just don't do it. There have been a lot of high profile cases of different celebrities like Kate Winslet. She won't fly with her husband in case something happens. She doesn't want them to be on the same flight. David Bowie for a long time only took boats to Europe. So, there are a lot of cases where people just live with this fear of flying. And part of what I want to talk about today is just to explain, break it down a little bit in terms of what is anxiety and how that affects fear of flying and what you can do about it, right? That's the bottom line. Because the psychology of travel is about not just understanding your fears, but what you can do, how you can still travel in spite of your fears. So anxiety, when we hear that word, when we hear the words fear and anxiety, sometimes, we think of them as negative or bad things. And they're actually not that bad, right? Part of them, fear in particular, and anxiety, they have been part of mechanisms that have protected us throughout the years, throughout our evolution. So we've needed fear and we've needed anxiety, which is sort of this intense worry, to kind of warn us about things that could actually harm us. Fear is sort of this really deep-seated ancient emotion that is very instinctual, and it lets us know that something is not right and we need to protect ourselves. The same with anxiety, right? A little worry, a little apprehension. It's something to make you think and say, is this, should I go in this direction or should I change course because I could potentially be in danger? So those are protective, but just like anything else, in their extreme or severe form, or when they go awry, they can actually be really unhealthy. And that's when we get things like phobias, right? There are all kinds of phobias. And in particular, fear of flying is really, they call it aviophobia. So this is this sort of intense, irrational fear of getting into an airplane or any sort of mode of transportation that's by air, so helicopter, airplane, so forth. And so, fear of flying and anxiety around flying, they start off from this sort of protective mechanism that's normal, and then it goes awry. And so one thing that is important is to understand what happens with anxiety. There are all kinds of theories about what causes anxiety and why it's more prevalent in some people versus others. But anxiety is sort of like this cycle. So it includes, we think of it as just like, I'm worried, so your thoughts. But it includes physiological responses, so how your body responds. It includes your thoughts that you have that overwhelm you, that are worrisome, that, lead to apprehension. And then it actually includes your behavior. So what you do in response to those thoughts and feelings that you have. And most of the times with anxiety, the behavior is avoidance. So that's in its extreme form. Fear of flying is that you just avoid. You can't take how aroused or stimulated you get in terms of getting, racing heartbeats, sweaty palms, racing thoughts, just feeling nauseous, or just feeling all those physical things that come with being anxious and afraid. And so what you do to avoid or, get rid of that discomfort is you just avoid the situation that's causing it, which is the plane ride in this case. The problem with that is it leads to this really ongoing cycle. You never actually confront the thing that you're afraid of. You actually develop more intense thoughts that are what we call irrational thoughts that make you more and more afraid of the thing because you never confront it. And so it's almost like this huge thing in your mind that's just so scary, and you never have the experience to dispel the myth that it's so scary. And so again, it's those three things. It's the physical responses that you have, the thoughts, and also the feelings that go along with that, and then the behavior, what you do in response to it. And so that's when we get to the part about what you can do if you actually have a fear of flying. And so I want to say one more thing also about what fear of flying is. I've been looking at some of the research and studies around this, and what researchers have found is that fear of flying is actually sort of a whole group of a bunch of different anxieties that may play out differently for different people. So for some people, it's really about it's a response. They maybe have had a negative experience while flying. Maybe they were in some really bad turbulence, or they heard a sound on the plane, or they had an experience on the plane that was really scary to them. And so since then, they've developed, some really intense fears, or they have heard about a plane incident, a plane crash. Maybe they knew someone who was in it, or it was in a town or a city close to where they lived. For some reason, a negative air flight incident really seems to have impacted them personally, right? For other people, it's really about a loss of control. So again, we're stepping onto this big metal object, this plane, and most times it's a pilot that we don't, if we even see him, his face, we don't know him or her. And we're really relinquishing control, despite the fact that driving is less safe than flying. It feels like it's safer because we're the one either that's in the driver's seat, or we're right up front or in the back where we can clearly see what's going on. So for some people, the fear of flying is really about not having control. You're really having to relinquish control. For other people, It is actually fear of losing control. So some people have a history of having panic attacks or their anxiety about other things, and they're really afraid of being in an enclosed place. So it also might be connected to claustrophobia, fear of feeling trapped and enclosed and losing control. You know, what am I going to do if I panic? I can't get out. Am I going to be screaming? Am I going to lose control? Right? So for other people, it's that. And for some people, it's also fear of the physical responses that they'll have, and that they won't know how to calm themselves down, right? So it depends, you know, everybody's situation is different, and so it'll be important for you to think about, like, what if you have a fear of flying? What is really contributing to it? Are you afraid because you had a negative experience? Are you afraid because you just, you know, something about giving up that control, not being in control is hard? Are you afraid of losing control and not being able to manage your own reactions while you're in flight, right? So those are different things. And again, like I said, some people already have experienced anxiety or depression or some, you know, some sort of psychological difficulties, and so flying just makes it worse for them. It exacerbates it, right? So what can you do? There are so many different treatments out there. That's one of the things that I wanted to make this video to tell you, is that actually phobias, like these phobias, which are like these intense irrational fears, we call them, they are some of the most treatable problems, psychological or emotional problems that people have. So you actually can get help pretty quickly. And with fear of flying, there are tons of programs out there, and they all have some primary components or things in common. First of all, one main component is education and information. There's a lot of information that's presented to help dispel myths. The myth that flying is dangerous, that you're going to die, that, you know, flight, being in the air is just this uncertain thing, right? It also gives information about the actual flight experience, what to expect when the plane is taking off, when it's going up to its cruising altitude, what turbulence means. In fact, it feels really scary to us in the passenger seat, but if you talk to many pilots, it's actually something, sometimes they'll say, turbulence? I didn't even know there was turbulence. So explaining turbulence, what causes it, and also explaining how planes are built to withstand turbulence and other types of in-air incidents. Also explaining to people how important it is to adhere to safety protocols. So, you know, we all know before the plane takes off, they go through their whole spiel where you either watch a video or you look at the flight attendants explain to you where the exits are, why you should use your seatbelt, how you should, you know, what should happen if you the plane goes down in over sea or over land. And really adhering to and paying attention to those things are very important things to do, because all kinds of research shows that people who are prepared in any kind of in-flight incident are more likely to survive. So if you were able to be present in mind and focus in the case of an emergency on a plane, you're more likely to survive that incident, right? So one component of treatment for airline phobia or air fear of flying, is to give information about the flying process and safety procedures, right? So there's the information part. The second part that most treatments or, you know, programs that help address fear of flying contain is information or strategies to help you cope and to manage your anxiety. So that often includes deep breathing exercises. It might include what we call progressive muscle relaxation, where you do these go through your body and you tense up your muscles and then you relax them, so you're more aware of your body and how tense it might become, and you can, you know, practice relaxing your body. Also, I just mentioned deep breathing. So you're, you know, taking in slow, deep breaths where you feel your abdomen going out and releasing and contracting. Um, Also, controlling or being aware of your thoughts. We call it catastrophic thinking. So, the minute you get on the plane and the wings, you hear a sound where the wings start to, expand, you automatically think, oh my God, what is that sound? The plane is going down. We're going to crash. That's what we call catastrophic thinking. So, becoming aware of when you start to have these thoughts of catastrophe and learning strategies to talk yourself down, like, no, that's where information about the flight process is important, because when you hear a sound on the plane and you have a thought that says, oh my God, the plane is going to crash, you can say, you know what, no, this is just part of sounds that happen when the plane is taking off. It's a little bit noisy, or when the wings are moving, or that bell that I heard is just the airline, the flight attendant making a call to the captain, right? So becoming aware of your thoughts and learning different ways to relax. Most importantly, it's usually deep breathing and progressive muscle relaxation. The other thing is, one of the major things to treat any kind of anxiety is exposure. So I mentioned earlier that anxiety makes us afraid. So what do? We avoid that thing we're afraid of. Makes perfect sense, right? That's part of the evolutionary function of fear and anxiety. But when it's unhealthy and you're afraid of something that's actually not dangerous, you're avoiding it, the thing you need to do is confront it, basically. And we call that exposure therapy, where little by little you go. So if you're afraid to completely get on a plane, little by little you get on a plane. So it might start with just stepping foot on a plane, or sitting in the seat, or being able to sit there for an hour, or being able to take a short flight on a small plane, for example, from Philadelphia to New York. Or then it might progress up to taking a transatlantic flight from the East Coast to Europe, right? So you're exposing yourself and you're practicing those deep breathing, those relaxation, and those thought processes where you're controlling negative thoughts about flying. So exposure is a big part, and that's where many of these fear of flying programs come in. They actually sometimes have therapists that actually fly with you on flights. You have to pay for their flights, but they fly and coach you through the anxiety that you're experiencing and allow you to have that exposure. There are other now programs that are through virtual reality. So they have the virtual reality headsets that sort of simulate flying, and so you can have the sensation of like you're actually flying, and practice some of the deep breathing, the coping, and the muscle relaxation exercises. And they even have some exposure programs that you can do over the internet, where it's almost like you look at a video and it makes you feel like you're flying, and you are become aware of how your body's feeling, what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and try to combat those negative fears and anxieties. So there is so much. And then, the third thing is that sometimes there is support groups. So there actually are support groups for people who have a fear of flying, or who may have been in have had in-air incidents that were scary to them, and they have anxiety about it. So those are, parts of how people professionals are treating fear of flying, giving information and education about flying, helping people to practice relaxation, and helping people to have exposure experiences where they actually fly or get into some sort of virtual reality flight, and then support groups where they are around other people who also have fear of flying. So this very treatable. Whenever, I always tell people phobias, what we call simple phobias, whether it's fear of dogs or snakes, or, certain settings, and in this case, fear of flying, these are things that you don't have to live with, right? There's all kind of programs out there that can really help. And it's really important because, I myself, I never went through a program, but I actually have experienced fear of flying, and then exposure, just doing it over and over and over again, becoming familiar with what the flight process is like, what it feels like when you take off, what it feels like when you land, what cruising and turbulence feel like? All of those things really, really help. So if you have a fear of flying, whether it's stopping you from traveling altogether or it's stopping you from enjoying your flight. So now with long flights, it really doesn't have to be a negative experience. You have food that you can purchase. There's, things that you can listen to, all kind of entertainment, movies. You can get, you can take your own handheld devices. So flying doesn't have to be a negative, uncomfortable experience. So if you are experiencing any kind of intense fears, anxieties, worries about flying, you can get help, and some of it is self-help, and if you need to, you can get professional help. Actually, under this video, I am going to put a link. It's for a program that's partially free. It was started by a pilot, and it's called fearofflyinghelp.com, and it's really great. It explains the whole flight process, and it goes through some relaxation and anxiety exercises, and it also actually simulates a flight so you can get some of that exposure. All right, so check it out. Let me know what you think. And I just don't, if you do have a fear of flying, don't be embarrassed about it. It's really common. It's normal in some ways, and there's help for it. But the main thing is to recognize that you have this fear. And again, that travel mindset, the psychology of travel, is really about understanding your travel fears and then traveling despite them, or finding some way to confront them, address them, decrease them, so that you can actually enjoy the wonders of travel. All right, so leave a comment. Let me know if you have had a fear of flying, if you have one now, what has helped, what help you're looking for, and I wish you safe travel.